Hello and welcome to Number by Color. My name is Todd, and I just finished playing the latest in the SteamWorld series of games, SteamWorld Quest, The Hand of Gilgamech. Unlike previous games in the series, SteamWorld Quest is a turn-based RPG that uses deck building as its primary battle mechanic. I am a big fan of the previous SteamWorld games and the way that they're all a different genre, so I was really excited to play this one. Unfortunately, I'd say it's probably my least favorite in the series, but that's not to say it's a bad game, rather a testament to the strength of some of the other games in the series, like SteamWorld Dig 2. In any case, there's still much to enjoy here, so let's get into it. SteamWorld Quest, The Hand of Gilgamech was developed by Image & Form, a Sweden-based game studio, and published by parent company Thunderful Group. It released on the Nintendo Switch in April 2019, Steam in May 2019, and Stadia in March 2020, and it is the fifth and most recent game in the SteamWorld series, following SteamWorld Dig 2 and SteamWorld Heist. I was eager to play this game when it released, and for a long time I was holding out hope that it would be released on PlayStation, which is where I played all the other games, but even almost 2 years later, it's nowhere to be found on either Xbox or PlayStation. It's actually really strange to me that the game is available on Stadia and not other home consoles. Regardless, I finally decided to pick it up and play, and though I'd consider the game as a whole to be a little uneven, I'm still happy that I did. If I'm being honest, the story is usually not the strongest aspect of the SteamWorld games, and I found that to be the case here too. Typically that doesn't matter because these games are more about the gameplay, but since this is an RPG, I was hoping for a narrative that was a little more compelling. It's not bad, per se, it's just not that interesting. There's not really any character development, and for much of the game, it was hard for me to even tell what the stakes were. It's one of those stories that starts off small and snowballs into something bigger, but it takes a while to start going anywhere. Even though they really don't change much over the course of the game, I still found the characters to be likable, and some of them are actually pretty cool, namely the swordsman Auric and the siblings Terra and Thane. There's even a fun nod to Final Fantasy with characters Wiggs and Budge. From a gameplay perspective, SteamWorld Quest is really split into three main components: exploration, combat, and deck building. I'm putting exploration in its own category, but there really isn't much to explore. The game is broken up into chapters, and each chapter essentially consists of getting from one side of the map to the other. Each map is split into subsections, similar to games like Trials of Mana or A Link to the Past, and other than the occasional hidden area, you won't be spending much time trying to figure out where to go, because there's only one way to go. The condensed nature of each map is actually nice though, because it helps each chapter to not feel too long, and even though there aren't many hidden chests or puzzles to solve, the occasional instances of searching for hidden paths helped break up the otherwise samey environments. The biggest advantage of smaller maps is that it helps make it less tedious when you want to go back to revisit previous chapters to either fight battles, search for treasure you missed, or farm materials for upgrading your cards. And speaking of cards, it's time to talk about this game's battle system. As I mentioned earlier, SteamWorld Quest is a turn-based RPG that uses customizable decks of cards to perform all battle actions. In the general sense, battles play out the same as they would in any RPG. There are standard attack cards, magic cards, healing cards, status buff and debuff cards, etc., etc. But there are a few cool aspects about the battle system here that make it a bit more unique than standard RPGs. One of those cool things is that your characters will always perform their actions first in each round of battle, which is really useful for planning how to take down your enemies. For example, if an enemy is close to death but one of your party members is also hanging on by a thread, and you're not sure if your attacks will kill the enemy, you can play your cards such that you perform your heavy attacks first and heal your wounded characters last, without fear that the enemy will get in an attack before you're able to heal. This seemingly simple aspect of battle can be the difference between victory and defeat, especially during tough encounters. Another cool aspect is that playing cards in a certain order can sometimes increase the damage you do to enemies. If you play 3 cards in a row from a single character's hand, you'll perform a 4th special attack that changes based on your currently equipped weapon. Additionally, some of your character's cards are more powerful when chained with an attack from another character in your party. These are fun wrinkles to the system that I appreciated discovering, and things like this kept battles from getting too repetitive. Speaking of keeping battles from getting repetitive, let's talk a bit about deck building. In this game, you'll obtain new cards from either progressing through the story, finding them in chests, or buying them from the merchant. Each character in your party can have 8 cards in their deck at a time, with each card taking up a single slot. On top of that, most cards have duplicates, meaning you can have several of the same type of card in your deck if you want. It might seem pretty straightforward, and for the most part it is, but each character will have a ton of cards available to them by the end of the game, so it can be easy to get a bit overwhelmed at all the options. As time went on, I found myself experimenting less with deck loadouts and instead using a handful of go-to cards, other than when the game forced me to add in certain types of cards to get through tough boss battles. The reason I stopped upgrading with deck loadouts is because at a certain point in the game, you're able to start upgrading your cards using materials you get from defeating enemies. I love a good upgrade system, but because of this, I started wanting to keep only the stronger, upgraded cards in my hand. Usually, upgrading just increases a card's base power, but sometimes it can add new traits, like the chance of inflicting a status debuff. This makes some cards way more useful as they're upgraded, which also makes swapping them out that much harder. I'm not going to take out my powerful cards for those new, non-upgraded junk cards. But in all honesty, having too many useful cards is a good problem to have, because it means there's no particular deck loadout that's necessarily the best you can have. At a certain point, it becomes more about your taste in combat style rather than the effectiveness of the cards. Okay, so now that I've given a brief overview of the game's core mechanics, let's talk about how it all actually works as a whole package. In a general sense, I'd say these core mechanics provide a really enjoyable gameplay experience most of the time. There are several odd things the game does that made me feel frustrated, but the weird thing is that even though I was frustrated, I still wanted to keep playing. And the frustration never truly hindered me from defeating challenging enemies. My first and biggest frustration is that leveling is gated. What this means is that the game basically forces you to stay at the level it wants you to be at any given time. Typically, every time you start a new chapter, you'll gain a pretty decent amount of experience for each battle, but once you level up a few times, you'll notice that battles no longer give decent experience. In fact, it decreases exponentially, making it so tedious to level up that you're basically forced into just progressing through the chapter. This might not sound like a bad thing, but there are some enemies and bosses that can be extremely challenging, and being gated from leveling up means that the only way to get past these enemies is to either develop a different strategy by working on your deck, which sometimes works, or by upgrading your cards. But upgrading cards requires you to fight enemies for materials, so why are you preventing me from gaining experience points but still forcing me to fight? It doesn't make any sense. I understand you want to funnel me to the next story beat, but forcing me to battle for upgrade materials is not as satisfying as letting me level up my character. It just isn't. I know upgrading my cards will increase the attack damage, but it's not the same as my character feeling stronger, because card upgrades only apply to that individual card, not the character. Another frustration that happened on multiple occasions had to do with the way cards are drawn into your hand in battle. Under normal circumstances, you'll have 6 cards in your hand at the start of each turn. Those 6 cards come from a pool of 24 cards, which is made up of the 8 cards in each character's deck. The problem with this is that your 6-card hand can be completely lopsided, where you may have more cards for one character than another. To make up for this, the game allows you to redraw 2 cards each turn. However, it's entirely possible that the 2 cards you end up drawing are also for a different character than the one you're trying to use. This really only becomes problematic when characters die. You see, when a character dies in battle, their cards stay in your hand, but they're unusable. Not only that, but when your hand is replenished at the beginning of every round, you may draw in cards from the dead character. And you may think to yourself, I know, I'll use my 2 free redraws per turn to get cards that I can actually use. Well, friend, as I found out many times, not least of which during the literal final battle when the boss had less than 100 HP, when you have only 1 living character left, the 2 cards you redraw can still be for the dead characters. I went through 3 turns where I couldn't attack at all because my hand was full, and every time I used a redraw, it was a card I either didn't have enough SP to use, or it was a card of a dead team member. This is incredibly frustrating because it makes you feel like you have no control over battle. This is not the feeling you want players to have in a game that requires at least some level of strategy. And by the way, I died during that boss fight because I wasn't able to attack the boss anymore. Level gating and having no playable cards weren't the only unnecessary frustrations I had, but they're the two big ones that showed up on more than one occasion. But honestly, those frustrations were always temporary because it only ever took me a couple tries to get past the most difficult sections. And that's partially due to the short nature of each chapter. If a tough boss is kicking your butt, just play around with your deck build and try again. Usually, you can figure it out if you're patient and have the right loadout. And getting past tough battles was still satisfying, despite sometimes being frustrated by an initial loss. Let's talk about something I had no frustration with, the art. All SteamWorld games share a steampunk aesthetic, where almost every person and creature is some kind of machine. SteamWorld Quest may be the best realization of this aesthetic out of any of the previous games in the series. Just the main characters alone all have such cool designs, and their character portraits are beautiful. Seriously, look at them. Maybe it's just me, but this art direction is a big factor in what pulls me into these games. The music in SteamWorld Quest is also pretty good quality. There were multiple occasions where I found myself either humming the overworld tunes or replaying the victory jingle in my head when I wasn't playing the game, which is one sign that the music is doing its job well. It's not the kind of soundtrack that'll knock your socks off, but it's one that does a good job at selling the feeling the game is going for. When it comes down to it, I really enjoyed my time with this game, despite there being a few occasions where the game felt like it was punishing me unnecessarily. My total playtime to complete the game was a little over 20 hours, and I think that's the perfect length for a game like this. There honestly isn't much here that doesn't need to be, so you're able to enjoy it for what it is without it overstaying its welcome. And especially on the Switch, being able to pick up and play wherever you are makes it easy to come back for more. If you're looking for a good, casual RPG to pass the time, and you enjoy deck building mechanics, this is definitely a game to keep in mind. It looks great, the music is catchy, and small frustrations aside, I genuinely think the game is worth checking out. I do have a soft spot for the SteamWorld games, so there may be some level of bias in my recommendation, but I recommend it nonetheless. If you guys have played this game, let me know what you think. I haven't seen or heard many people talking about it, so I'm genuinely curious to see what other people think. Thank you guys for watching. Like the video if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more from me, and as always, I'm on to the next one, so I will see you guys later.